In order to be a fabulous storyteller, you have to have a good story. And Sony has this amazing, really untold story. If you're charged with optimizing a brand that has lost its way, it's every day saying, who are we not talking to that we should be talking to?
You're listening to Campaign Brief, presented by Wondertree Media. I'm CJ Thomas, and I'm sitting down with marketing industry leaders to hear their stories, strategies, and lessons learned that you can use to stand out and grow your brand. Hey everyone, in this episode, I sit down with Cheryl Goodman. Cheryl is the head of corporate communications for Sony Electronics, where she describes her role as the innovation evangelist. And we dive more into what that means in our discussion. We also talk about how Cheryl approached revitalizing the way Sony's brand story is told. And we get into how her background in PR and journalism helps her with her job today. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Cheryl Goodman. So it sounds like you've been doing quite a lot of traveling lately.
I have been out of the country back and forth for the last 4 weeks. But home on Saturdays, but then back out again on
Any
Monday.
interesting stops?
Lots of interesting stops, as a matter of fact. And we started off the rodeo in South by Southwest, and then New York, and Toronto, Laredo, Texas, then Laredo, Mexico, Dos Laredos. And so that was the last. Those are the cities I can remember anyway.
So that's great. And one of the places I thought would be really cool to start is I've seen a little bit of the speaking that you've done in the past, and I've heard you describe that a big part of your role is to be the innovation evangelist for Sony. Can you unpack that? What does that mean?
Yeah, so innovation evangelist, I think it can mean two different things. I think in the context that I'm using it is, at the end of the day, I'm a fabulous storyteller, right? But in order to be a fabulous storyteller, you have to have a good story. And Sony has this amazing, really untold story. And part of that's cultural. Japanese company that's, going on 73 years old, very traditional, very humble company. And so the typical marketing tactics that we're so used to from the Silicon Valley approach of vaporware and, name it and, claim it until you can actually do it, that doesn't exist in Sony. So there is some cautiousness regarding how you tell that story, and I believe that this story has simply never been told. And so when the position was offered to me by Mike Fasulo, our president, I immediately jumped on it, because at what point in your career do you get to take a global brand, a brand that has had, we've enabled tremendous categories, not just products, but categories, portable music, color TVs, total market share in both of these areas, and to somehow put some polish and dust off a brand that maybe had lost its way. And I thought, epic opportunity. So in that sense, an innovation evangelist is I am telling the stories of those great engineers, of these tremendous humble leaders, and this epic technology that's really hidden behind form factors. And so it's a title that I humbly accept and try and fulfill every day.
And that's such a big task. Like, why is that so important specifically to Sony?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because I think many companies that are, I'm going to say, remiss, underestimate PR. And I think it can often be the women's ghettos of employment. Is like, oh, well, go tell the PR chick, right? It's kind of like the last mile. You close the deal, you got the terms, you secured the market, the product packaging has been designed. Now, get the press release out.
Yeah.
And that is such an underserving of the process. Good PR starts in the business room, right? It's the negotiation of the co-marketing agreement. It's the negotiation of all of the features, whether that use case for the original use of that product in one region is one way. An example of that would be, maybe a speaker that uses gesture or voices, voice activation. So why it's important to me is if you get into the process early, if PR is inserted in the process early, then you can have tremendous epic outcomes, and it can be impactful globally. And that's why I love PR at the end of the day. And it is a bit of a surprise for me in my career to come back and be exclusively focused on public relations. But for a company like Sony, it's like a little nation, right? It's not just a company. It's 120,000 employees in almost every continent. I'm sure we're in the galaxies somewhere too, and so it's like, it's not just one company. It's really a 73-year-old company that has built numerous categories that impact everything we do, to the headsets we're wearing today, microphones that we're talking into, portable music, the TV behind you, and that's just the things we see. It's not the unseen componentry. So hopefully I answered that question.
Yeah, and I think that you're obviously very well equipped for that role, starting even all the way back in broadcast journalism.
Right.
And I've seen that you have quite the path to get to where you are now. I'm curious, just maybe I'm sure there are a lot of similarities between broadcast journalism and even what you're doing now, maybe very different sort of context, but a lot of similarities in that you're telling the story.
Right.
And so what are maybe some of the skills that you think you gained early on in broadcast journalism that you feel really apply to what you do today?
Great question, and you're absolutely right. The power is being able to tell a story. Secondarily is what's the most important, right? And if my primary role is to tell that story, it's to help journalists tell the Sony story on our behalf, right? So I know what they need. I know when their deadlines are. I know what's going to catch their eye. I know what's going to resonate with them. I know that when their bullshit detectors are on, right? I'm like, don't say it like that, because A, that's not true, and then also too, you're overhyping it. So I try and be as objective as possible when I approach promoting Sony products, and it's really the easy thing to do because the products are so good. I mean, when you think of Sony, you think of premium and you think of quality. Now, our products over the last 7 decades didn't always hit the mark. I mean, we've had some really interesting undulations through the decades, from Betamax to memory sticks. But again, how journalism has colored my approach to this profession and to this company is to just pull out that good that many long-term Sony employees maybe didn't recognize as a story, or didn't see, or they became myopic to. And again, I think the discipline in of itself is really underutilized globally. I think when I think of companies that used PR really well was Apple in the early days, like Markoff, I believe his name was. The guy was a PR guy at the end of the day, and it was the positioning and the telling of that story. So I think it's critical. And every startup, every small firm, I don't care if you sell socks or what you sell, the PR strategy should be core to the business model.
Yeah, and that's something that we talk about a lot too, is even just when you speak about marketing and communications in general, it starts so much earlier on, even in the product development phase, right? It's not something like you're saying, it's not this afterthought, like, okay, everything's developed, now let's talk about it. Now let's think about how do we want to get this out? It's something that should start at the, as early as R&D.
Right, exactly. I think that's so wise. And so the best CEO of any company is someone that has that PR sensibility. And so having the journalistic background helps me really understand the context of what this product could mean, the downside of what that product could mean as well, and then just overall problem solving. It's like, what problem are we solving again? And if you have to think too hard about it, it may not be the right product.
Yeah. And speaking of problem solving, I'm curious. So let's talk about right when you get started at Sony. What is it you walked into, and what did you kind of see ahead of you?
Oh Lord, we're going there. Okay,
we're going there.
I'm gonna get a drink of water as I think about this.
Yeah, and just kind of what it looked like, and what was it that you saw as the road ahead of you? What did you really want to create there?
Yeah, so it's been about 1 year and 9 months, and it has gone by so quickly. And so, as I said, I came in with very high expectations, and those expectations have not been in any way diminished. But I knew it would be hard work, as anything worth doing is, right?
Oh, yeah.
My analysis of Sony as a brand a year and 9 months ago is, I believe, was spot on. And then my boss, Mike Fasulo, and I went to our counterparts in Tokyo to socialize. How can we revive a faded brand, and what are the methodologies that one would need to do this? And this wasn't an ask for, we need more budget, or willing to take the budget just in case someone's listening. But
no question there,
right? But it wasn't about we need a Super Bowl ad, or we need to triple the digital ad spend. It was uncover what we already have, dust off what we already have. It was also to embrace the missteps that had been taken over many decades. And so when that brand is faded, it's actually a positive scenario because the brand is still visible, the brand is still there, the foundations of the brand. You can't go to really anyone and say, have you heard of Sony or not heard of Sony?
Right.
Like everyone has
the
heard
awareness
of Sony.
is there.
The awareness is there, but it's the deep technology inside that's not, right? So it's been very easy to talk about the enablement of these categories. And, again, 1968, the Trinitron color TV, 100% market share, right? We invented that category, and then followed by the miniaturization of that same set, right? Then portable audio, I think it was 78, was the Walkman, right? And the first time that you can oh my gosh, I can walk around and listen to the music. I still have mine, my yellow Sony Walkman.
Yeah, they're perennial products.
Yeah, they are. And you think about these major milestones for categories. And so what Sony did for the industry is to really say, this is a novel way to approach a way to delight and entertain, right? This wasn't a blender. This wasn't a utility. This was, how can we connect you to content that you love or music that you love? How can we free you up? And this is an emotional experience, right? And so this is why the brand is so epic, because it did things such in that way that hadn't been done before.
And it's it reminds me just even, as I'm watching Sony from the outside, seeing that transition from that focus on just product and the technology, but there's this deeper purpose with Sony, and you start to see that come through now with the stories being told and the content being shared through Sony.
Yeah. I'm glad you see it, because that makes me feel good. We must be doing something right. I want to jump in and tell you a story that I think is pretty clever about Sony, and it does have to do with the early founders. In 1942, it was actually it was 1945, war-torn Tokyo, two engineers trying to cobble together a business, and their first mission was to create electronics that would actually solve for a social good. And so it was a rice cooker. It's a war-torn. It was the country, it was devastated.
Yeah.
The rice cooker never worked, but the point is that very early on in the founding days, they had made this commitment that whatever they did, that it would have a societal benefit, that there would be social value. And I think the definition today of social value is multifold, but can you provide a service, right? And so that's the DNA of Sony. And again, when you're doing startup launching of companies here in the U.S., no one asks you what your CSR strategy is. No one asks you what your social value is, unless, of course, it's a B Corp or something that's designed to do that. But that has been the fundamental difference between everything that Sony does. And so you can look back at their giving history. And the early founders made a commitment to children. They made a commitment to education. And our new CEO, and I shouldn't say too new, he's been with the company for many years, Kenichiro Yoshida, former CFO, just launched what are called our purpose and values, and it's a renewing of what do we want to do socially with our technology, and a lot of those things resonate so deeply with me that makes me think I'm not just pitching wares or telling stories. We're extending upon a vision, and those purpose and values include things like diversity, and so it's not really been done before, that you have a Japanese-led company that's as stoic as Sony has been for many years to come out and say diversity is important. Right. I mean, this is a big deal. And so I'm actually very excited about how does this color the way that the technology is produced. If more women, more people of color, more diversity happens in the engineering as an aspect of this purpose and value, the customer wins, right? Yeah. Because your market is larger and you're resonating more. So I think it's things like that, the intangibles, less of the, oh, here's a product strategy, or here's the, the markets are going to hit, but what drives the innovation inside with the people who do it.
And how have you seen that focus on the purpose sort of shift the overall awareness that we know Sony has? How have you seen that affect it? And I think something that comes to mind is just when you talk about marketing and communications, there's this overarching topic about millennials, and millennials always being much more aware of what is the why, what is the purpose. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's, arguments on so many sides of that, but I'm curious kind of where that sits with you and how you've seen that at Sony with this shift on the purpose.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, it was a big question for me. So, when Mike offered me the position, and my response was, would love to dust off an epic brand. Yeah. Part of me was nervous, right? Because you are coming into a company that has a very different culture. It's not a mystery that the Japanese culture is a little bit further behind in terms of opening up opportunities at the top for women, are really anyone that's not Japanese. And so I was thoroughly delighted to meet Kaz Hirai, who was the CEO at the time. And you may know that he was really the champion behind making PlayStation just this epic experience, and so inclusive and so warm and intelligent and approachable. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. I'm sitting in Kaz Hirai's office with Mike Fasula, and I'm like, these guys really do want to change the world. This isn't, just about profits. Of course, this is really important. But I was really, a year and 9 months ago, felt like really the luckiest person in the world, that I had the opportunity to witness how this company not only is, but where they want to be, and to be part of that story, certainly for the North American market, is absolutely a privilege. I will say this, though, nobody's perfect, right? And the most that we can ask for companies, especially global companies, is awareness, because it does take time. You can't unravel, 2,000 years of process, and even in women themselves, right, is there's societal mores outside of the company that suggests you should do something, whether it's pressure from your mother or your grandmother, or the societal pressure, right? So it's not going to change overnight, but the net is that the more leaders that we see that look like us, the more encouraged society will benefit, and so will those individuals. So
I love that. And what is that in terms of, like, what is it that's keeping you going every day? What is, even just going into taking this position, what is the vision specifically for what you're working on, that you're contributing to, that you're hoping to build, and what does that look like?
That's such a big question. Oh my gosh.
We like big questions.
Big questions. It's a big question, and it's a deep one, and it's an important one. And I would lie if I said I knew the answer immediately, because I think about it often. I mean, both subscribe that you have one life, and what are you going to do with it? And I personally want to live a life that has value and it has impact, and where you can make someone else's life less difficult by providing insights, providing lessons, providing mentorship, or providing feedback. That's what I do with my team, and I have a fairly small team, but in a tremendously mighty team. And I am not a blocker of information, of assets, or I don't feel successful unless feel like my team feels successful. And likewise, I don't feel successful if my boss, if Mike doesn't feel like I'm advancing the game and we're advancing the game at home, in Tokyo. So for me, when I take a position, I really take it, it's your life, etch it out on your headstone when you're gone, Sony employee. So I take it seriously. And here's the funny thing. That's the DNA of Sony employees worldwide. And it's kind of a phenomenon because it's not so much the case here in the United States. It's really next best offer, next best IPO, next best, stock option, or whatever. And if I don't get this, then I'm out of here. And that's cool too, because you got to do what you got to do. But the net is when you get a company where your DNA of your beliefs marry up with the company, and then you can stand behind a product that, again, is quality, and then you can also say, my input here is it going to be a value add, and to help bring this great company along. That's the trifecta, right? That's perfect. So what gets me up in the morning is, most certainly my family, right? Usually it's the dog barking, which really gets me up in the morning, but is it
a real dog? Or
he's
are
a
we
real
talking
dog.
About, okay.
I do have Ibo. Ibo is
Okay.
not popular in the household with the Australian Shepherd because the Australian Shepherd thinks she's real. So
Really?
Standoffs.
Wow.
It's really funny. The cats are like, Ibo, you're cool, but the dog, no. So
I was wondering how Ibo is with other dogs, and
you got to one night when you can't fall asleep, do some internet searching on Ibo and alpha packs, and there's packs of dogs, and you throw an Ibo in there, she quickly finds her rank among the pack. But all dogs think she's real, so. Wow. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I almost brought Ibo. I should have next time.
I was wondering if I should have a dog pen for Ibo here.
There you go.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And so you talk about your team a little bit, and what is that in terms of, what does your day-to-day look like? And I'm curious, just even how do you know, and you sort of alluded to this, but how do you know that you're doing your job right? What is it that's most important to you today? What are you focusing on and really trying to work with your team to achieve?
So macro goals, for the business is if you're charged with optimizing a brand that has lost its way, it's every day saying, who are we not talking to that we should be talking to? And that's a big part of it. I'm fortunate to have built a really good repository of relationships over my career. So it's not difficult. It's not cold calling. It's just saying, hey, let's talk about Sony. So it's very, not very easy to do it, but it's easy to do it. The bigger part, I think, is adding value, business value. And I think this comes with PR too. Anytime you're in a cost center for the organization, and I think it can be in an uncomfortable place. And my career has largely, I ran Athena before, so I had P&L responsibility prior. And prior to that, I ran my own agency and production, and so obviously P&L responsibility because half of it was my money. And then prior at Qualcomm, I had P&L responsibility. When you get into PR, yes, you have departmental P&L responsibility, profit and loss, but what you don't have per se is you're not creating revenue. And anytime you're in a position where you're not creating revenue, I think you have to ask yourself, how do what I do points to helping you make revenue?
How do you connect that?
Right, and this is in a sea of impressions, or the world of PR is like, oh great, yeah. So David Pogue last week wrote a tremendous article about the noise canceling headphones, the Mach 3. No joke, seriously, the best article ever.
Wow.
And so we know that's a home run. We know that's a win, but how many people read New York Post, and what is that range? And so I'm always looking at, how do I put numbers behind this activity? How do you quantify something like a review? And I think impressions are a broken process, right? And there's a lot of good strategy out there to articulate that better. And so we think about things like that. We think about our social handles as well. One of the things that we had done coming in is set up social handles for executive team. It didn't exist before. And it's like, why not? Mike Fasula is the greatest guy in the world. He's like very dynamic. He's super connected in the community, loves baseball. And it's like, let's tell those stories, right? And there's Mike doing this, or, he led the Pride Parade in San Diego last year. And I'm like, this guy needs a Twitter account. So we're thinking about the social overlay, then also balancing the voice and the tone, again, from making sure that we're not making anyone uncomfortable or overstepping bounds, and of course not being litigious. So we're thinking about ways to carry the story that are relevant, that you can measure, that you can point to the business, and it's not just the headphones. It's it's in TVs. It's like, okay, can we draw a line to say that we highlighted the fact that Bravia TV is the most epic viewing experience in the world, but further that is the image processors inside, right? Is like telling that deep technology story, so important. And then you flip over to all those image sensors that are happening in our digital imaging group, which you brought up earlier in the conversation, which I love the fact that is that we are an image sensor leader. So if someone's clicking a camera, if an image is being taken, it's very likely Sony is in that componentry somewhere.
Yeah.
So.
And it's cool to hear you talk about how these stories that you're telling, at the root of them is still the product or the purpose and the mission of the product. Because I think especially right now in a 2019 world, a lot of it's tempting from a communication standpoint to say, well, what's the biggest social cause and how do we jump on that?
Right.
And if it doesn't tie to your core mission and your core purpose, sometimes I've seen where that can backfire, and
Fire
you see
Island.
this,
Right.
Yeah, you see this like, right. That's where it's at right now.
Right.
But
it's
you see
sad.
that backfire where it's like, okay, I appreciate you mentioning this cause, but why are you really doing that? What's the alternative motive here?
Yeah. And I got to tell you, I when I left Qualcomm, if I can kind of tell you my narrative, it was San Diego State, from KPBS intern to KUSI intern at one point, then NBC intern, and then CBS, and then ABC. So almost every news station in this town I've worked in some way, fashion, or form. And then I was recruited into MP3.com, which at that time in 1999 was the highest IPO in the nation. So it was, I forget what the valuation was, but for that time it was the highest IPO there was. Wow. I worked for Michael Robertson, who, as Fortune says, their words not mine, can see around corners. He's hands down one of the smartest people I know, and maybe in the world. I hope you're listening, Michael. But he is amazing, and I learned a lot of the way that I approach my thinking with a hybrid of telling a good story as a journalist, but then also thinking about what the world actually needs, right? Mm-hmm. And so the marriage of those two things have really served me quite well in my career. I spent about 6 years with Michael, and then was recruited into Qualcomm and worked on various technologies for over 10 years. Upon exit of Qualcomm, I was at Qualcomm Labs. So it was really that intoxication of entrepreneurialism, right? It's a labs entity, and let's fund this, and let's do this, and app economy, and daily average users. And so I was just absolutely,
let's go for it.
I was infatuated. So after working on that for 2 years, I'm like, I'm starting my own company. So I started a company called Social Global Mobile, and the intent there was, it was a play on words a bit. So social, local, mobile, right? If you watch Silicon Valley, it was like the funniest episode ever is about Solo Mo, right? And so I thought it'd be funny to name my company Social Global Mobile. And the intent on social was not only social media, but was social good. And because I did really feel is that if I weren't working in a place where I felt ethically aligned, or if I felt emotionally aligned, or I felt valued, then I really never was going to be that great of a contributor, right? Mm. Because you're just not. You can't be your best self if you can't bring your whole self to work. So I left social and started Social Global Mobile, and represented social good entities from STEM educational initiatives to women's initiatives to just the gamut of giving. And I learned some really core lessons about authentic giving. So long way to get to the answer to your question is, if you don't know why you're giving, if you don't think that your giving is actually going to make a positive impact for the long term, not just for the next quarter, not
right.
for the next metrics or measuring cycle, you probably shouldn't do it.
Right. And not just on the P&L.
Yeah. And that's the part that really resonated with me and Sony. I go back and it's like, oh, it was a rice cooker. They were just trying to feed folks at that point. But somewhere in that story, as they tried to do good, one of the earlier products was a transistor radio, actually invented in the United States, but they had Sony had optimized it so much. And it's just really interesting to watch the evolution, and I'll talk about this tomorrow morning in my keynote at AMA, is every product cycle and evolution had this core societal benefit to it, right? And I'm like, you just can't make stuff like that up.
Right.
Because no one believes you, maybe for a little while. But at the end of the day, good business makes good business, right? So everything we learned in kindergarten is true. Be nice, don't hit people. It's just like, it's not rocket science.
Yeah.
And
how do you then, just to kind of unpack that a little bit and make it even actionable to, say, who's listening to this who might work in maybe not quite a Sony but a growing organization, how do you approach bringing that narrative into the story to make it still relevant today and to really communicate that? What are some of those lessons? Like, how do you actually approach that brand storytelling?
Yeah, I think that's a tough question. It's a good question. Looking at your value proposition and saying who benefits, right? And every benefactor has some societal component. So, if it's, like Tom's shoes, it's shoes, right? How can we shoe the rest of the world? If it's, software as a service, all right, how can we help, the Monarch School or David's Harp or any other charity locally maybe donate software to help them do this? We're bettering our product because we're giving it out, but at the same time, we're extending our brand, but we're giving back. So use the product genuinely to your audience that would actually use it, right? To your target market. And there's no downside to that, I believe.
And what do you mean by using the product genuinely? Like, do you have an example of what that looks like?
Yeah, so let me give you an example of the ways that I think about CSR, and I'll use IBO as an example. So the bottom line is that IBO is 4,000 moving parts. The name itself, it's a robotic dog. The name itself means artificial intelligence bot, right? So started in 1998. And nobody was saying AI back then, right? So in the very early days of IBO, Sony made strategic investments in donation form to Carnegie Mellon and other schools that were researching AI before it ever crossed our ears as something in common day vernacular. And so if you're in the business of robotics and AI, partner with a nonprofit that's also in the business of robotics and AI. And then in that sense that you can extend that to other areas, the grants and scholarships for the promotion of students who want to go to school to learn robotics and AI, right? So it's the full ecosystem of, we believe in robotics. We believe we need engineers to produce robotics. We need professors to teach robotics. And so give to the people in the communities that really don't have a business model for high revenue, but maybe those donations make the difference between whether they educate, 5 or 500.
And what I'm hearing from that really is like looking at it as a long-term view.
Totally.
Instead of like, okay, we
Turn
have
and
IBO
burn
in front
away.
of us right now.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, how do we continue to foster this environment that suggests that we'll be able to continue this advancement years down the line?
Right. I heard an interesting story, and it was actually from Rick Warren about giving, and that the hunger crisis in Africa has never really been solved. You remember what was the big worldwide concert? Billions of dollars was raised, right? And hunger still exists. Money doesn't solve social problems. You can give as much money as you want to homeless entities or to other areas. You have to change the behavior, right? You have to build jobs. You have to build ecosystems. You have to build employees to maintain these ecosystems. And so that's how Sony gives. And it's really a very smart way to give, because money comes and goes, but skills are for a lifetime, like lifetime learning. So that's why we focus on education. And I personally am very focused on STEM, because I believe that STEM, advances our society, science, technology, engineering, and math, but STEM also pays very well. San Diego's a pretty expensive place. When you are paid very well, you have life choices, which means is if you decide to have 4 kids, well, great, have 4 kids, because you can pay for daycare, right? If you want to be married, great, get married. But if you don't want to be married, you're sustaining enough of your own income. So I believe in it from a societal standpoint. You absolutely need to earn as much money as you want to support your lifestyle, whether it's children, or where you want to live in North Park, or where you want to live in La Jolla. Go get it, right? Go get it, but don't say, well, I didn't really want to go to college, and it's, it sucks because I'm not making enough money. No, you chose not to make enough money, because here's the careers that enable our society, that enable our nation, that enable our learning, that advance everything. And the money, here's where the money is. So, and even if, let's just say your mind isn't the mind that is cognitive and analytical, and you don't want to be a coder, or you don't want to do that, you can still be in that industry, right? You can, and so find a way to work for the Qualcomms, to work for the Sonys, to work for the Intuits, to the Intels, any of these companies that are in the ecosystem, making the ecosystem pay you well because they value you, and then you can live the life that you value.
Wow.
I know, I felt like a little bit. I'm like,
you just gave us a nice motivational. I think we'll throw some motivational music
there
on
you
that.
Go.
Yeah, I love it. That's amazing. And I think just kind of shifting gears a little bit, one thing that I've read you've written about in terms of just your job at Sony and some of the challenges that you face and some of the things you do, you talk about this example of when people walk down the TV aisle and they're looking at all these things like 4K and OLED and all these, and you say, well, how do we get them to understand, why do I care about this?
Right.
Where does that come from? Can you unpack that a little bit?
Well, and I think especially for today's consumer is a TV, wrongly so, is perceived as just a conduit. It's just a box. You don't really look at the logo on the bottom. It's a black, flat box, right? And you plug it in, and it's all the same. And the reality is it really isn't all the same. And the only way that you know it isn't the same is seeing is believing. And I think that's the challenge, not only in print advertising or video advertising or digital advertising, is the resolution is always going to be compromised, right? It will never be that optical performance that you're going to see.
They're not watching the advertisements on that TV, right?
Or even that, like, it drives me crazy, like even our print ads, and I'm like, gosh, there's got to be a better way. It's a picture of a TV, and it's like, of course it's got this epic beach scene or these rich colors, whatever. So then you're forced to play a specs game, right? How many pixels, how many nits, and optical resolution and high dynamic range. And then you really have to spend time to educate the consumers. Like, why do I care about high dynamic range again? Right? And I think at the end of the day, this is where it comes into play, is the processor, right? A panel is a panel is a panel, it's a piece of glass, right? And it goes through a very typical process, but it's no different than the processing power that you would experience in a computer that would affect rapid productivity, experience for you, as in the TV. It's going to enable a rich, deep, detailed experience that I would never be able to articulate through this microphone to your listeners. It is really seeing is believing. And I got to tell you, I think Sony is absolutely the best. And you don't have to believe me. Go into Best Buy and go look at TVs and do a comparison, and you will believe. It's a little hard to do because you're going to have to run back and forth and whatever. It's a good workout, but it's the same thing in the audio, in the case of audio. So these noise canceling headsets I just told you about, Mach 3. How do you explain sound to someone? How do you explain sound acuity to someone?
Right.
This is very difficult to do. So you really have to talk about use cases. In use cases, obviously noise canceling, this is more often than not airplane travel, right? So comfort is an issue. Battery life is an issue. Having lightweight headset is an issue. You take all kinds of other different factors. If you're looking at a competitive product, TV, headset, whatever, and nothing jumps out at you, what will jump out at you is brand, right? Because your brand is going to be the ultimate decider, price and brand, right?
For sure, yeah.
And no one would ever question Sony as a quality engineering organization, right? That's just fact. They may balk at the price. The price is dictated by the quality that goes into it. So you have price as a factor. We have premium is how we position everything, because it's the truth. It is the top of the stack. Anyone in the industry will tell you that. That's why all broadcast equipment, one of our larger divisions, is all Sony, yep. Right? Is our majority of Sony. So the net is quality is always going to override. Quality drives the attributes of brand. And then if you're still not convinced, it is things like CSR. Well, I know that Sony just won the most ethical companies, and this is true, last month, one of the most ethical companies in the world, by the way that we approach our carbon footprint, by the way we treat our people, et cetera, et cetera. So it's performance. It is a context of the brand, its price, its quality, and at the end of the day, it's just getting in there and seeing the difference.
And it all sort of accumulates, especially when you talk about the importance of brand in that decision making. It all kind of accumulates into what brand really is, which is reputation, and kind of looking at, like you said, all things compared, you're going to go off of brand,
right? And
all these elements that go into brand, it's not as simple as, and we've talked about this before on another episode, where it's not as simple as typeface and logo.
Right.
Like there's so much, and the storytelling that goes into a brand that. And it's so funny, we come full circle. You talk earlier about how you have to tie everything you do at the end of the day to revenue, to numbers.
Right.
Somehow you have to draw that line. And it's kind of hard when you're talking about storytelling and brand initially, because it might not mean revenue tomorrow. It might not mean revenue next quarter, but it's something that contributes to that long-term brand reputation. Right. So when you are playing that game of comparing on specs, right, it's kind of...
It does. It really, it's the deciding factor. I think it's other things too. I think it's great leadership. These are other intangibles. It's in the product development cycle. When you work for a multinational company that has core products but that are localized to different regions, there's nuances that you have to take into consideration. In Japan, houses are very small. Voice is not popular, but what is popular is gesture. So, speakers have a touch sensors where you don't even have to touch it, but they sense by your gesture. And here in the U.S., it's all about voice, because we're in these 2,300 homes full of crap we don't need, and we're like, hey, Siri, do this, or whatever, Alexa, do this. And so product engineering, does it have a gesture, and is a product appropriately localized for the market, right? And so that's a lot of the decision making that I hope I influence with our product teams. Is gesture's not really going to cut it here, because the problem is I'm not near the device to activate gesture. It's voice that's going to work in this market. So those types of conversations are really important. How are you going to apply the technology for the local market, and then of course the pricing for the local market too. I mean, our products are almost always more expensive, but it isn't kind of an it's what it is situation. It's like you absolutely get what you pay for. So.
And in terms of just kind of looking down the line, when you talk about just the overall direction that you're heading, what are some of what's in store for the future? What are some of those big initiatives to continue to tell that story and to continue to keep pushing this forward instead of just kind of kicking it into cruise control? What is it kind of looking ahead from your perspective?
Well, I don't think the Sony car even has cruise control. It is perpetually on. The accelerator is always on. This is a very fast-paced company, and historically, the perception of Japanese companies are slow and methodical, and there is a lot of preparation. So there is a slowness and a methodical way to approach everything. But when we execute. So it is rapid pace. And your question was, what are those future forward technologies that's going to continue to have epic category creating impact on the industry? Well, we talked about one of them. One of them is IBO, right? Not a big market right now for companion robots. You're like, what do I need a companion robot for? Robots are by design a utility. Like Roomba, go suck that up, right? We believe robots are actually far greater than just a utility. Utilities are important, but companionship in a world where there's so much loneliness, especially in the elderly population, is that, and this is lesson straight from Japan, is a companion robot can actually be preventative and health-wise. If you can pet or touch something and have that interaction, that actually has an emotional lift that has a quality to it. So IBO is so radically unique in the sense that he stores memories cumulatively through the cloud. So the IBO is knitted together in such this way, is that he is powered by a Qualcomm chipset. I mentioned 4,000 moving parts, 2 cameras, mapping sensors. So when he is unwrapped from his little doggy bed, he's automatically calculating his location in your home. He's measuring distance to the walls. He's got these flight sensors in the front of his chest where he really knows where he is. He also has facial recognition. So once he looks in your eyes, beautiful OLED, organic light emitting diode eyes, he's scanning your face and he starts to build a memory map of you. And so that data is then stored securely and shot up into the cloud through Amazon Web Services. And that dynamic, that trifecta, that capability is what makes him build memories over time. And so my IBO that I take with me everywhere acts very different with me than he does when I go on press tour or when I take him on the table. He's kind of looking at me like, Mom, why are we here?
That is incredible.
Yeah, it is really, really epic. So we definitely got to come back and do a show on robots. Just robots, and we'll bring some more robot stories.
I'm all about it.
Yeah. So when you think about emotional technology solving an emotional need, this is really kind of a trip. And a lot of this was through Kaz Hirai, who just stepped down as our chairman. Again, big leader in PlayStation, has this term called Kando, right? Kando. And that simply means emotion, the ability to connect a consumer through emotion. It's the same thing that happens with the TV, though. When you watch something where, if you've ever seen an 8K TV, you're like, my eyes don't even work that well, right? It's just like, or if you hear what we launched at the Consumer Electronics Show 3 months ago, it's called 360 Reality Audio, is the concept that you are not just sitting in the audience in the front row watching your favorite artist. You're behind the vocalist and you're directionally hearing drums and you're directionally hearing any other acoustic, vocal, whatever. It's experiential, right? So to have experiential sound, to have experiential TV where
it puts you in it rather than in front of it, right?
It's kondo. It's this very Japanese term.
I like that, kondo.
The kondo, it's so cool, or kondo as they say. But
got it.
But the net is the difference of Sony. We're not about market share. We're not about, hey, we have to offer 70 different types of phone. We have to have every single home must have this TV. That's not the magic of Sony. Yes, we created that category, and at one point we were. But the magic is, can you create an emotional experience? We've done it with PlayStation. We've done it in our TV category. We're doing it in audio. So what's next is the advancement of the 360 Reality Audio. So you've got to hear it. And then the continuation of companion robotship and the evaluation of that to bringing in more utility while you develop that personality. And, you ultimately solve problems.
I love that. And I mean, that ties so much into everything we're talking about. And it's just that experience, and how are you providing that experience?
Yeah.
And One of the things kind of before we wrap that I love to ask, and I mean, you've had this career starting in broadcast journalism and then going through Qualcomm, running your own company, and then now leading communications at Sony. I'm curious, what maybe any contrarian kind of ideas you have when it comes to marketing and communications, or maybe unpopular. So an example would be, something where maybe there's a trending topic right now in marketing communications that you feel might be missing the mark. Is there anything that comes to mind there?
Yeah, there is. And it has to do with social media. And I would say because I came from an era where, God, that made me sound old, but I came from an industry where it was cable news and the three, ABC, NBC, CBS, right? Yep. And I remember being privileged to be a journalist because I had the authority and privilege to disseminate a story to viewers, and I thought that is a privilege. So when social media really came into play, Twitter, I think it was 2007, and things like LinkedIn, I immediately acknowledged the power of a platform to speak to many, right? And I thought this was the coolest thing that you could ever do. And I still think it's really cool. However, I believe that we are making a wrong step by putting so much investment into influencers, because influencers, yes, will influence. But the bottom line is, if your influencer comes from a place of credibility, then this means something. If your influencer doesn't really have the DNA to offer an opinion on this, and maybe it doesn't matter if it's tennis shoes, but unfortunately, influencers are influencing, and I believe in a way that's very negative, and it's really kind of dumbing things down. And the truth is no longer, there's not a premium on truth anymore. And this is a very sad state of affairs, because as a journalist, you take an oath towards truth, right? Yeah. And I take that very seriously. In my job today, we don't say things that aren't true. And when I deal with a journalist, I would never try and say something that wasn't true to get a story out there that wasn't true.
Right.
With influencers, that's not the case. There is no oath, right? So be very cautious of, yes, you got all this, interest, and you got all these views, but what's the quality of that? And here's the bigger picture. I think it's a short-term win. I think that there's a societal penalty that we pay for that. And if truth is at risk, what relationship does anyone have where truth isn't a component? There is no relationship. There are no relationships with people who don't tell the truth, right? So we should be very cautious of using influencers.
And it's interesting hearing you talk about that, because earlier you mentioned how, you feel that impressions are a little bit too high on the pedestal, like viewing that as your only metric. And that's such a key piece of influencers. Of course, you can, of course, attribute direct revenue and sales to influencers as well. But I think one of the things that come to mind, it's really cool hearing that you chose this, because I think when it comes to influencers, one of the things that you don't have control is where it ends up down the line.
Right.
Right now, you can get those impressions, you can even get those sales, but hearing what you're saying and just this overarching theme of having to really protect and nurture that brand story, and seeing, like, you see every day some influencer going off and doing something crazy, and I always wonder, what impact does that have on all the brands that they've been advocates for this period of time?
It's not cool. And I gotta say, Twitter followers follow Walt Mossberg, the original OG from, or should I say OG from Wall Street Journal, right? And he is very big on the Literacy Project, and it is understanding the value of truth and objective reporting. And this is, I think, such a big deal for society at large. So, maybe when I retire, I'll do something like that, Truth in Journalism, some organization as such. But until then, I'll keep, uplifting the true good works of Sony. It's a great company, a great employer, and I'm really happy that they're headquartered here in San Diego, and that we're here to be able to talk to you about that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I mean, I think I speak for so many when there's a lot of inspiring work coming from Sony, not just in the products, but the content that's coming out and the way the story is being told about the Sony brand. So it's really cool to watch that.
Yeah, and I didn't even talk about the ecosystem with Sony Music and Sony Pictures and Sony Financial, but I will tomorrow in the AMA. So
perfect. And before we wrap, just curious, this is your time to give a plug. So if people want to find you, if there's anything you kind of want to send the audience to, just want to kick it over to you for that.
What a great opportunity. Let me think about this. So I'm on Twitter. It's at CK Goodman. And I just wrote a white paper with an organization called Athena that I used to run, and we partnered with the UN on the number 5 sustainable goal of gender inclusion. And so there is a white paper out there that talks about not only this UN goal, but what we've done as Sony, and again, not perfect, but aware and open, and then programs that we've set in place specifically to address this, and product things, and those products things are called alpha female. So the problem really is that highly technical photography, if you look at the White House Corp press, it's almost all men. And this is a program that says we're going to equip you with the latest and the greatest cameras. We're going to provide you with a mentor. We're going to provide you with a grant of money, and we're equipping women to go out there and be the best photojournalists that they can be. And that program's called Alpha Female. So go check out the white paper. It is on Sony's website, and you could probably find it. You can find it on my Twitter handle, and I'll just have to go in there and like do a permanent pin or something on it.
Perfect.
Yes.
Well, thanks so much, Cheryl. Really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, this is fun.
Thanks so much for checking out this episode. I hope you liked it. I hope you got a lot out of it. If so, it would mean the world to me if you could jump over to Apple Podcasts and leave an honest rating and review for the show. That helps us get this out to more marketing leaders like yourself. I'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks.